The identification, detention, intake, and diversion aspects of what the counties have been doing. So Monica, you're over here.
Oh, definitely.
Yes. You're wearing now the panel 1 hat. We'll give you clear directions in the future, I promise. So we're going to explore those elements of the practice model, and we're going to do it across the county's experiences. So let me open this up. I'm not going to do introductions again. We did that once already. You know who you are. But I want to open it up by talking about, from our perspective in Georgetown, and what we've seen happening in Nebraska and what we've seen happening in other places, is that this early stage of the crossover practice model work, kind of the phase 1, provides a tremendous opportunity to build trust between youth, families, and system partners. And I think if I break that out into smaller buckets, it provides an opportunity to build trust specifically between families and young people and those system partners, but also to build trust between system partners. So I'm not saying this is the case in Nebraska. In fact, I think if I were to look at the lay of the land for us nationally in the work that we've done in just about 100 counties now across the country, I think that the level of trust that existed when we walked in the door between the child welfare side of the casework and the juvenile justice side of the casework was pretty good. You know, there were obviously the relationships things, there's some history that you needed to deal with, but overall, I wouldn't have come into this environment after being exposed to you all and say, wow, this is almost a litigious environment that exists between these agencies, where they have horrible history, they don't trust each other, and they clearly don't want to work together. That's just not where we saw the work in Nebraska. But that being said, there's still an opportunity. I want to explore this a little bit about how the practice model in setting up the collaborative work provided opportunity for enhanced collaboration, not just between child welfare and juvenile justice, but also potentially some of the other partners in the equation. So bringing in the lawyers involved. I always got to bring in the lawyers, right? Having been a lawyer, I can do that fairly. But bringing the lawyers in, was there distrust? Were there conflicts that existed in how the lawyers related to the various agencies involved in the process? Or it could be guardian ad litem or constant. So I'm not limited in the trust issue just to families versus system, or in the context of system, but also between system partners. So let me start with that. Was there in any dimension that I've mentioned, and as we would appropriately discuss it in this forum, was there distrust that you saw historically between some of these players? And if so, how was it exhibited, and how did it perhaps create barriers to getting to better outcomes for kids? Every one of you know I was going to start with this question. So yeah, Tim, why don't you go first?
In Douglas County, you know, I'm the one that was calling the families and setting up the team meetings, and kind of you know, saying when to come and who's supposed to come. I felt early on that sometimes it's stepping on people's toes, all the other players. And that includes maybe the schools for like a truancy, where I might set up a team meeting and send an email, and we want someone there, and they're not understanding our process. That was a problem. And it could be, you know, year to year too, because they get new people. But I think as we've progressed, you know, with all the different agencies that are part of our CYPM, you know, we've really come together and worked as a team. But early on, it was a little awkward and uncomfortable.
So some of that was referenced earlier as Monica and Amy were presenting, that some of it is about making sure that the systems know why you do what you do and how you do it, so they don't go to the most negative place when they see something happen. Right? How about in terms of the families? What did you see historically in terms of the level of trust between families and the systems that we're trying to help them?
They're afraid they don't want another person in the household. You know, they don't understand. They think it's court. Even though I tell them from the phone call, this is not court. It's an informal meeting. You're part of the process. We want to hear your side. We want to hear from the youth. Unique opportunity, and that they're still scared. I mean, they come in and they see the large number of people, and that's intimidating to them. They walk in that room and they're just, oh my gosh, I didn't know all these people were going to.
So I'm eventually going to get to what are some of the things you've done to build trust in any dimension that we're talking about. But for right now, I just want to stay with What are some of the challenges around the issue of trust that you're seeing in one or more of these dimensions? So thank you, Tim, for that. How about others? Jeff?
Well, I think on the SARPI side, not knowing what to expect in some of the meetings was a huge key to us, especially as it relates to families. We've only been doing this just about a year right now, so we have a long way to go as it relates to families. But the key thing is consistency with us and making sure that they're included in everything. We may not have the best process in place right now as it relates to families and the youth, but we're always looking at different ways of improving upon that. So I think the openness that we have in regards to that improvement is key, and making sure that we get the family involved as much as we can so that that trust can improve.
So go back historically though. So you're stepping into the things you're currently trying to
Sure.
do. Historically, what was going on, if you could channel families and young people, how were they experiencing this, and did that lead to any trust issues?
Well, I just think it's overwhelming for them, and it has been overwhelming for them, which caused distrust amongst the youth and the families.
So chaotic?
Yeah, it's probably chaotic. They tend to shut down. They tend not to talk or want to be part of that group, or part of the discussion. Frustrated. They get frustrated at certain things that are being said about them.
We actually have a microphone. Yay! Thanks, Jeff. How about you, Christina? How would you talk about this issue of trust?
I think
And you've got a microphone now.
Is that it?
I think Gage County has always,
Radio personality coming out.
always worked really well together as different agencies. I know that over time, since we've been doing this, I've seen a change in families of how they have entered diversion, and we talk about the different services available and how that has changed, just increasing trust and increasing just comfort with families. But I think we've always done really well.
In Dodge County, our biggest issue, I think, is turnover in both agencies, probation and HHS. Even on the supervisor level, when they leave and stuff, then you have to retrain. So that's been our biggest issue, I think, and then it just takes time for someone to get on board. We've been doing it in Dodge County for about 2 years, and so the people that have been along on the ride the whole time, I think, have a way better understanding, obviously, so it just takes time to get them on board. And someone that understands it better is going to be able to explain that better to the families too. So but turnover is a huge issue in Dodge County for both agencies. So it's hard to build trust when you get a new caseworker every couple months, or probation officer.
So again, similar to some other counties, the level of trust between agencies was pretty strong in Dodge County. It was not an issue that you were really dealing with.
Between agencies, the example I was thinking of is they would always try to hash it out before court, and we've addressed that with the form, but that's kind of for a later panel, I think. But now things have gotten a lot better, I think, because of the crossover model too that we're using. But
all right, we'll dig into that some more as we come back around again about how you build the trust. So, Monica?
I think in the beginning, the key thing for us is that the two different agencies were kind of working in a vacuum, separate vacuums, where we're doing our thing over here, probation's doing their thing over there, and prior to crossover, we really weren't communicating. Not because we didn't like each other, it was more that we just didn't communicate with each other, and so.
So it wasn't a byproduct of lack of trust?
I don't think so. I think it was just a matter of we did two separate things and we really didn't combine the two. And I can remember in the past having children that are state wards for a period of time and we had no clue they were on probation. And then all of a sudden we find out, oh, you're on probation too? And so, I think a key thing for us in building that crossover was really pulling in the right people into our stakeholder group. The Public Defender's Office, the CASA, the people that really have that interaction with both of the different court hearings. And getting a better way of how we can educate why we do what we do on both sides. That helped kind of get rid of some of that frustration between the two agencies that sometimes occur when they say, why are you not doing what we're wanting you to do? and, you know, really communicating and explaining, we're not doing that because that's not how we do the work, and really educating on how we do the work on both sides. And I think as far as how this affected families, is that we now have more of a unified approach, so families don't get confused on who they're supposed to go to, and don't get confused on what information they're supposed to tell each side, because they're talking to both of us at the same time. So I think that's really helped.
Okay, so you transitioned just now into the solution part of how do you build trust. Because when you were talking about two agencies, two systems, basically going on two parallel tracks without a lot of intersection. When I think about, if I try on channel what a family would feel like experiencing that, it's like, well, you're both involved with my family, why don't you talk to each other? Why am I having to go to different court hearings on different dates? Why am I having to go to a meeting with child welfare on one day and then 2 weeks later at probation? Why can't you combine those things for me?
Right.
So talk more about the solutions. So what have you done in your county that is tried to build that level of trust and faith with the families, that you really do get it, that they need a more seamless experience between the two systems?
I think a lot of that has been that
Hold your mic a little closer, Monica. I know you don't like it.
is really having that joint family team meeting, so that we're all there at the table with the family, that they're hearing the same information from both of us at the same time, that we're really taking a good look at the services that we have in place, and that we're not duplicating things. I think that was a key piece of it for families, and really making sure that they get a good, clear understanding of what our two roles are, that there are certain things that you do have to go to the CFS worker for, and there are certain things that you have to go to the probation officer for, but that we're having those joint meetings so that both sides know what we're doing. It's not a mystery anymore of what services we have in place for a family, because they already know. So I think that's really helped, and I also think that the meetings that we have between probation and HHS, where we really talk about those cases that we're struggling with, I think that helps, because then we can really kind of iron out some of our differences we may have, or some of our confusion we may have, before we approach that family with a plan.
So we're going to get to more about the ongoing casework, but bring to life for your county, how does a parent or family member and young person experience their first contact as a crossover youth, which could be at an intake meeting, it could be at a detention, preparing for a detention hearing. How are you introducing them to this in a way that begins to build trust?
Well, we do have a pamphlet that we have that has information about crossover, explains kind of what the purpose of crossover is. There's a probation officer, and it used to be Jason Murphy, I don't know who it is now, but we have a probation officer that when they have that initial detention hearing is really contacting or making that contact with them to say, this is what crossover is, this is what you're going to see happening. Those CFS workers are coming to those hearings so that they see both faces at the same time, and they know that they can talk to either one of us about what their questions are, if they have certain things that they need help with. So I think that has helped, having us make sure that we're attending all the hearings together.
That was a fairly novel process that you had developed and capacity that you had built. I think different counties in Nebraska do it in different ways, but it's something we haven't seen in a lot of other jurisdictions around the country, to have a designated person when there's going to be a detention hearing or in the intake first appearance, to say, my job is to find this family and this young person and talk with them about what they're about to experience.
Right.
And that person is not their designated intake officer. Their job really at the courthouse was to make sure there's an understanding of exactly what's about to happen.
Right.
And I think that is about building trust, that you respect me as a family member or youth enough to take the time to explain something to me that when I get into court, it's going to be very, very confusing in terms of boom, 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 the pace that it goes. So that was a fairly novel thing. You've had a transition in that position. Someone else now has taken over that.
Right.
But you've not abandoned the idea just because that person left.
Right. Right.
Okay, straight. Tim, why don't you talk about how you do that in Douglas?
Which
Again, I'm
one?
trying to keep to that intake, detention, initial phase.
I'm not really involved in the court part of it, though.
Right. But
So
go ahead, but you are very involved in the front end.
Right. But as far as the front end, just, I call the families, explain everything. We also have a pamphlet. Most of the team meetings are scheduled by phone. If they do want a letter, I'll do that. I'll put a pamphlet in it. And, maybe redoing the pamphlet might be something we want to do to help them, just to get that message out. We get a lot of families coming in, even though it's been explained to them, when they meet NFSN, they're doing the initial paperwork, they said, I don't know why I'm here, they don't understand everything, even though they've heard it. Because on the quick phone call, a lot of things are going on, I might get them in the car, or they've got kids screaming, something's going on, and they're not really listening to me. And then I do a follow-up, or kind of a reminder phone call to try to get them in for the meeting.
Thank you.
It's a lot of information to absorb. And you know, sometimes you call them and, you know, they have these different meetings. They have the NFC meetings and they're like, well, why can't we do it on this one? Well, then I have to, well, our meeting's a little bit different, the team meeting process. I've had a few families ask about that.
I think this goes back a little bit to Dan's point earlier in terms of the state level work. To make sure you bring families into the planning process as you think about how you're going to roll this out, expand awareness about why it's important to do the work in this way. I mean, I think all of us in this room are working with the young people and families that we're talking about. But probably many of us in this room have had either a family member or a friend who had a child come in contact with the system in some way. And once that happens, it is an overwhelming phenomenon about what is going to happen to my child, what is going to happen to my family. And so, I mean, I have a personal experience here with a very close friend, PhD, University of Chicago, whose son got arrested in college, and he just freaked out because his son's in jail. He's being offered, you know, admit what you did, and you can get out of jail tonight, and on night court, and he's calling me up in the middle of the night saying, I have no idea what to do. So having this better understanding of the way families experience it, and then reacting and responding the way I think all of your counties have. But these two first examples, they have designated people, and their job is to meet with the families and explain what's happening right now in a way that they may not get once they get into the courtroom. And that, no disrespect to the judges, but you're moving cases and you're trying to have a dialogue with the family from the bench, but it's not the same as that family being well prepared by counsel or by caseworker when they come in the room. Anything else, Tim, to add?
I was going to say one other thing. When I make the phone call, a lot of these people say, what was the charge about? You know, it might have been a couple months ago by the time I got it. And they're like, well, they didn't do anything on that. There was no report. Well, you know, there's the street release and they might not have actually received anything. So they get upset about that. If it happened at school or if it was, they weren't supposed to be charged with that.
Great. Why don't we just go back up the row and Maggie, talk a little bit more about this if you have something to add.
I was just going to add on the family engagement part. We are lucky in Dodge County. We kind of collaborate with the mediation center, and which I just saw her walk in, Jane over there, and she facilitates the meeting. So if the kid gets on diversion, but in the previous 2 years has been involved in either system, then we have what's called a facilitated meeting, and we don't have any plan. I provide a summary to all the professionals, but we have no plan in place. The family comes up with it at the meeting. So it's a huge, huge, important part of the meeting. We don't say, you know, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. They come up with it on their own with, you know, county attorney approval and everything. But that just gets them, you know, it's their buy-in, and they want to participate a little bit more, I think. So family engagement has been really important in Dodge County, and that part of it is going well. So.
But that process you're talking about, Maggie and Jane, thanks, and welcome to the meeting, requires a really skilled facilitator to understand how to navigate that conversation in a way that stays family-centered and strength-based and allows the family to help develop a plan in a way that, as the worker, you want to make sure it's a plan that ends up being constructive and helpful. So there's a delicate balance and walk there that you're trying to do. I think that happens in all family team meetings, but particularly at this stage as well at the front end of the system. So I think what you've done with your process and with Sarah's involvement as a county attorney, and Sarah was supposed to be here, I know she's ill, but it's really been a powerful example to families about that they're being respected and they're being trusted and they're being treated as the experts on their family, which I think sometimes in the historical or traditional way of handling cases we've not always done. Yeah. So anything else to add, Meg?
No.
Okay. Christina?
I don't know that I have a lot to add to
Okay.
this, except that I know that our probation officers are, when they do the intake, when they decide if they need to go to detention. That crossover process starts when there's an alternative to detention used. And we try to, in diversion, often when we're meeting with them, and I know they do when they're meeting with them at intake, we just try to assure the family that we want to keep them out of the system. We want to do everything that we can to help them maintain their independence and not be involved in the system.
So I mean, I think I've heard it from all four of you who've spoken thus far, and I imagine, Jeff, yours isn't going to be much different. There's a differential in power that's taking place here, right? So normally the differential in power is the system holds all the cards, and the family holds very few of the cards in terms of who's making decisions. And now you're shifting that differential, and the question is, how do you most effectively do that in a transparent way that parents trust? And that's, I think, true in many ways in our system. In fact, if you think about the way juvenile justice as a whole is changing, it's a differential in power in terms of probation workers coming into court now with assessment tools and structured decision-making vehicles that shift a little more power to the probation officer in making recommendations than historically they may have had with just their subjective opinion alone. All of this is about a differential in power. Jeff, what to add?
Well, I guess I'll talk about the detention side of things. Our collaboration, our communication starts immediately. Once a youth is brought to our attention, we are definitely wanting to contact that parent, that social worker, the NFC worker, whatever, and get their information as soon as possible to find out what would be the best case scenario for that young kid. And then once we go from there, we've decided as a group in Sarpy County to have all of our detention hearings at a different time to allow us that opportunity to come together with all the entities involved with that youth and that family to come together and talk about what is in the best interest of this kid, what should happen from this point going further, and then what alternatives can we put in place. That family, that youth are involved in those pre-detention meetings that we have, and their input is definitely taken into consideration. And then as a group, we come together with a common recommendation for the judge to make that decision. I think in the past we've had some different opinions in regards to those recommendations, but now coming together and working together with the family and the youth and coming up with common recommendation is beneficial and helped us out. I would say that's probably one of our successes that we've seen in Sarpy County.
And because of the way you're doing that, there's less surprises by the family about what they're about to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a big piece of it as well is the Public Defender's Office. And them being on the same page with us, they can relay a lot of that information to that kid and that family when it comes to recommendations.
So there's some other areas I'm going to get into next with the panel. But before I do that, are there any questions from the audience on what you've heard thus far about what some of the county could question about? Because I know you each have the way you're doing the work in your own county, but you may have heard something from another county that you want to explore a little bit more. Yeah, please go ahead.
Going forward then, I get at the beginning that you have this joint team meeting. Going forward, whose responsibility is it to get that next team meeting and the next one organized? We see a little bit of fall off. It's happening at the beginning, but then we don't see it, especially if kids are detained or if you're in YRTC or anything like that. So how do you decide who has to do that?
Well, I know in our county, we've our probation, we have one specific probation officer that runs a lot of those meetings, and that's Molly, and she's over there. She's our main person, and when it comes to those detentions, she does a lot of the coordinating from that point on.
Anybody else?
Well, I'm not a probation, but for diversion, we designate during the team meeting which agency, if it's going to be the Juvenile Assessment Center or the NFC worker, who's going to be responsible for the follow-up of that service. Example could be therapy, so the NFC, they're going to kind of give me the information. So we're getting all the information. I'm not calling the therapist all the time. NFC is taking care of that. So we're not kind of duplicating.
If I can translate a little bit also, what I'm hearing both from Jeff and Tim is there's someone designated, but it's not that the other people are abdicating responsibility as being part of the team. It's just that there's clarity about who is going to do what leading that meeting, which I think is always a good byproduct of a family team meeting.
Which could be different each phase, you know?
Right.
It could be a different person, but in that detention phase, we have Molly that's taking care of that, so.
Other questions or inquiries? So I'm going to pose a question to the room then. If you think about the issues of trust and distrust, what are some of the biggest challenges you think you see? And you can parse it out around the family issue of trust and what you see happening in your communities to build that trust, or whether it could be system players beginning to trust each other. I think at the very, very first meeting that we had in Nebraska on this, I talked about the work of Peter Block, who writes a lot about collaboration and what it takes to be good collaborators, which means that you are willing to tell the truth about what you do well, what you don't do well, to basically be transparent with your data, and to engage in what he calls unconditional acts of surrender. And that the way you build trust over time is by doing those things, both between agencies, but also with families. That you're willing to talk in an honest and open and transparent way with families. Take risk, in a sense, be able to get to a place where you can assume risk without fear of blame. Right? So what do folks in the room see in terms of what's happening around those trust issues, besides just our designated panelists? Anybody?
I think there's a lack of trust between the officers and the caseworkers.
Yeah.
And I think once that trust is built, if they're collaborating, there shouldn't be discord between the family. They'll see that and they'll believe it. But getting certain officers and getting certain caseworkers to do that, I think, has been probably somewhat of a struggle.
So if you think about culture change, where the two agencies, as your distinguishing officer from caseworker, to really begin to trust each other and think that they're on the same page, is still a bit of a challenge.
Yes, I would say.
How that filters down right to the line staff level, from well-meaning mid-level supervisors and senior managers, is always a challenge with shifting culture and change, right?
I think a key
Thank
piece
you for that.
a key piece of that too is also the turnover, and that we have to continue training, reminding all of those new people that are coming in that this is the process that we're using, because I think that plays a big piece of it as well for us.
I think the new staff are more open than the older staff. So it's the veterans who have an idea of what probation does or what the department does. And to me, that's where getting that culture will change.
Well, if you think about the culture of an organization, it's grounded in the people who have been there a substantial period of time that carry forward the messaging. And so the fact, maybe, that you're talking about newer staff being more open and ready to accept it actually is a nice comment on how well you're trying to communicate what you're trying to do. Because in many organizations, if those more senior staff members are constantly messaging that, yeah, that's what they're telling you, but the way to really get good outcomes is to do work this way, then it undermines your ability to see the change actually take hold. So the fact that you're seeing that the newer staff come on board looking to do the work in this way is a very positive step. Now the question is, how do you get those more senior staff to also say, I'm on board with this too, and I'm going to see the benefit of doing this. I think as Michael and I have done this work in jurisdictions that have seen the work embedded over time, one of the ways that they've helped to change the culture is by, over time, have periodic staff meetings and cross-system staff meetings where you're staffing cases, where you're analyzing what went well on cases and what didn't go well on cases, and allowing the workers themselves to talk about those experiences and to have their colleagues hear from them firsthand exactly why they believe this is a better way to go. We had a recent experience in Sacramento where a cross-system staffing by everyone, it was lawyers, it was child welfare, it was juvenile justice, it was family advocates, and in the panel, it was the probation officer on the case who most powerfully described how empowering that young person and family to do the casework differently was one of the more meaningful things she'd ever experienced in her probation career. Now, she hadn't been in the department more than 5 or 6 years, but having that come from a probation officer who basically broke into tears about how powerful it was for her to see this child begin to conform her behavior, because people were finally starting to listen to her in a different way in how they set up these types of meetings and build the trust that she would never open up with them before, but she didn't trust them. So I think that's a vehicle also to see how you can see the change take hold over time, is to county by county, or at statewide gatherings, begin to present case scenarios that allow you to understand the work very powerfully from the people who do it each and every day, including the young person and families themselves. So hopefully that kind of thing will be built into your sustainability strategies as you do your work over time. Okay, other comments or thoughts about the trust issue?
I think it is, though, important to recognize that we're asking two separate groups of entities, of staff, to share work with one another. So you have to be vulnerable with each other. I really, as a caseworker, I have my expectations from CFSR and all these, entities that I have to be responsible. I'm going to trust that probation officer is following through with this, because that is what we have agreed to do. But maybe from a supervisor or management level, we also have not always done regular opportunities for them to grow that trust with each other. I mean, building that foundation doesn't always just come with having good or bad experiences with actually doing the work. It comes from being with each other, having fun with each other. I mean, we talk about our individual agencies doing staff recognition or, opportunities together. I don't know that we've done that a lot with our two entities, just for us to be with each other, not necessarily at a family team meeting, but just any meeting where we're talking to each other, sharing donuts, whatever, might be an area. Doing that regularly can grow some of those opportunities too.
That's great.
I think in Sarpy County, NFC and probation and HHS does a good job of communicating together. I would say our distrust is probably more with legal parties. And just, I sense still some power and control, not necessarily the buy-in for the family and allowing the family to make that plan for them, and maybe some distrust with the family and that they're gonna follow through. That the families are in the situation for one reason or another, and I think a lot of times that gets put on the family, whether it's the parents or other family members. And so I sense some distrust still between legal parties being able to give up that power and control to say, okay, family, where do you want to see this go?
When you mean legal parties, you mean the attorneys?
Yes.
Basically? Okay, I just
Yes.
want to make sure that that's clear.
And I'm representing those team meetings, who has the availability and the time, and when they're available to me, and they have to be there in order for their client to be there, and those types of things.
Well, I think that leads into distrust of the process itself, the meeting itself. I mean, sometimes we have meetings where I'm like, okay, that went pretty well, like we came up with a plan, but then you have one chaotic meeting where you come out and you're like, what? And the family does too, and then that just creates that distrust, and then, they bring that back on the caseworker and the probation officer, so then those workers have distrust in the whole process, and so kind of that spreads throughout the agencies as the rumor of, nothing came out of my meeting, so it's pointless. And
So,
so
but I think, I want to turn to Margene, but I think that speaks to the need to make sure that the work is not defined by the one-off case. So the idea that you staff cases, that you discuss the things that work well, but also things that don't work well. And that way it allows the staff to see, yes, in the majority of cases, this work actually is successful. But yeah, this is social science. There's going to be the unsuccessful cases as well. Margene.
I just was also going to talk about the legal parties and the attorneys in particular. I mean, we've talked about the trust that's being developed between HHS and probation. We've talked about both agencies developing trust with the families. When that happens, you have to remember that the attorneys represent those. We have to advocate for their positions. We can't say, I trust you, so no, I'm not going to present your position in court. So that will filter its way up as that is developed. But you have to understand that an agency attorney for HHS is going to advocate HHS's position. Probation doesn't have an attorney at our table, but then we have attorneys for the juveniles. We have the guardian ad litems on the child welfare side. We have the parents' attorneys on the child welfare side. And so when you go into that courtroom, it can become more adversary. But if that trust is built between the parties and the families, then you may not have somebody saying, well, I disagree with that. And so it may not express itself in the same adversary way in the court. But I think everybody does have to keep in mind that attorneys' roles are a little bit different in this, and we do have to advocate for our clients.
Judge?
So I agree with Melissa. I think that still is a continuing process. I would say, however, that because we have a history of having a juvenile drug court, a family drug court, in which attorneys have had to give up a little bit of their traditional adversarial positions as part of those processes, that it's been a little bit easier for them to also, in the crossover youth, give up some of those traditional adversarial options for them. We're not all the way where we should be, but we are. It's coming along. The other thing I would say is that, I was probably a skeptic. It's not probably a surprise to anybody about this process going early on, and I was a skeptic basically because I thought already that the people involved in our system generally worked well together. They communicated well. We're small enough still that relationships matter. But I do think that the formalization of that process has increased that trust level and allowed people, those relationships, to even strengthen over time, and that has been beneficial to us.
Thanks, Judge. Judge Conley?
Well,
I thought I saw you.
I did. I may be stating the obvious, so I apologize.
Yeah.
But you don't go to the courthouse to have fun. Except maybe for a name change or an adoption. So I think we have to bear in mind that these people don't trust us. They have the vast majority have had somebody in their family or somebody they know that were mistreated by the system. And they're not coming here expecting to have a good time. So I think that has to just be the benchmark that we work from, is addressing that issue first. Because if we don't address that first, we could all trust each other. It won't matter. It just won't matter. So for me, the focus is trying to hopefully get them to trust me.
End of the line. Thank you, Judge. Please.
So it kind of brings together everything that people have said, and I'm new to my position as a facilitator, so I feel like I can say it kind of unbiasedly. I facilitate for Douglas County, and they keep their team, it's the same people every week, and there is a huge trust amongst that team. Like the county attorney is a huge part, like you guys said, and I can go in there, and I meet with the family ahead of time as well as NFSN. I know 100% what I'm telling them is what Kara will do. So so we go into that room, and I see families come in distrustful of us, but I've seen like 80% of the time where the family leaves completely trusting that room, and I think it's because we trust each other in that room. So I know 100% what I tell them won't backfire on me, and I think Dan can agree with that. What he tells them ahead of time won't backfire on them. I don't know if we agree.
Well, and I appreciate that, and what I had my hand up for, these two have already spoken to, start with the premise that the family doesn't trust you, and I'm saying that, and I'm going to encompass most of our family, and for a variety of reasons that are already been spoken to. So as I sit and listen to the professionals talk about some of the challenges of cooperation, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be county attorney, whether it be whoever, put in your mind that we all get to learn case to case, week to week, from what we're learning. And I appreciate that everybody in here has grown in their own teams and their own jurisdiction. That family gets one chance. They didn't learn from the week before. They didn't learn from 6 months ago when the young girl came in and was told by the mother on the drive over to the meeting, the foster mother, that she wouldn't be coming home with her anymore. By the time we get in that meeting, that young girl didn't care a twit about that shopping return. I'm asking you to keep in mind, and please continue to work on your trust, but start with the premise that family doesn't trust you. You're gonna have to earn that. I'm gonna ask you to not try once with your colleagues. Professionals need every bit of respect and consideration that the family needs. Oh, you were this way in the last meeting. No, I'm gonna continue to try to engage you. So thank you. I think that I couldn't put a percent on it. Show me rather than tell me. Mandy, I appreciate you walk out at the end of a meeting and the family is clearly in a more trusting mood. That reflects on that staff. And what you said, one more and I'll try to stop. That it goes back to show me. There's a lot of initiatives going on. One of the things, crisis intervention training for police officers. The most impactful thing about that training for me, that 40-hour training, is when the officers come that very first day, very first after the introductory session, and tell them how they've used that training on the street, how they can go home at the end of the day feeling better about their job because they had a new tool in their belt and it worked. Telling those stories will convince more people than give up the power structures. Your comment about power, we're never going to have where it isn't a power disparity. But I'm going to try to give you as professionals some. If you go home feeling better about your job, you know, there's huge value in that for you and your family too.
I guess the composite of what I'm hearing is that this building of trust is for families, it's a journey. It's not defined by one good experience at an intake meeting or one good experience where a police officer de-escalates behavior rather than arrest and remove their child, or they get a good ruling from a court. It's built upon a set of experiences over time where they feel that they've been listened to, that their voice has been heard, that they've been respected, that they've had some meaningful input into the decision. I think for me, and I look at Jane and others in the room, for me, the biggest challenge of this is that with these family team meetings and the way we're trying to do case practice, we're moving more to a family-centered, strength-based approach. And there's this discussion, we actually do it in one of our certificate programs that some of you have experienced, where we ask the question of the room, you know, who should be the final decision maker? The system representative or the family? And it leads for a very interesting discussion because, you know, for me, my answer is that you want the family to come to that final decision consistent with what's good for their family and their child, which means that you've got to have an incredibly skillful facilitator to help navigate those conversations in a way that leaves you in a good place. Because if a family member says, no, I want my child to return home today, and everybody else in that room knows that child returning to that home is going to be in danger, then that probably isn't going to end up with that child going home. So how we navigate this in a way that is respectful, good communication, and the families feel like they're really being heard, to me is a first step. And every player in the system needs to be thinking about the way they engage families in that way for us to change the culture and build the trust. Some of you heard a story I told about a judge in Ohio who listened to the tapes of, he's a presiding judge, he listened to the tapes of his fellow judges who were in court on the family court docket. And he would then call those judges and magistrates into his chambers and say, I've been listening to the tapes, I'm hearing how you talk to the families and the young people, and I really think it doesn't reflect the way we want to engage our young people and families in our community. Couldn't hire and fire those judges, but he wanted to at least share the values of how he believed we would get to better outcomes. And that was the judicial piece of the puzzle of engaging families in a different way. So I think this starts at the intake phase, when families first come in contact, but then it's going to build through every one of our discussions through the day. Okay. Interesting judge. Longer story. Totally fooled me in terms of what I thought he was about, but that's what he was about. All right, I want to move to diversion. One of the benefits of the family team meeting and the diversion process is to end up with a more meaningful diversion plan for which children could be more successful. So talk more about how you cultivate the diversion agreement when you choose diversion as a meaningful option and the county attorney's in agreement. How are you going about doing that, and what are some of the challenges you faced in being successful on the diversion side? Who wants to jump in first? Tim?
Well, we have to look and see what the services are in place right now, and then we have to pick the one or two that's really going to help them.
So how are you doing that? How are you determining which services a child needs?
Well, we've done a pre-staff before, but then during the meeting, we all have a pretty good idea about what might be a good one, or the county attorney might turn to me and say, Tim, what would diversion look like? And I'm just putting out some examples, and everybody, all the team members chime in. And so then we write the case plan.
So you're doing that before you're meeting with the child and family?
No, this is during the meeting.
With the child?
With the child.
Okay. I saw a hand shoot up.
So I sit on the Douglas County meeting as well, and so as we're kind of going through and hearing what the family has to say about what's going well, what's not going well, talking about the incident, kind of what they're currently working on, and if they like it, don't like it. A lot of times we bring it back to, we're not even talking about this incident anymore, we're just talking about what do you like about school, what do you do for fun, and things just kind of pop up, and so it's sort of that kind of bouncing back of, oh, I heard you say that you really enjoyed playing, your intramural football or something. Is that a place maybe we can find something with like your high school? Is there anything going on? So a lot of the services we're going to be looking at are things that the child already wants to be involved in, or we're just trying to enhance that by things they've already told us. And we'll ask them if they don't seem interested. Are we missing the mark? I mean, we're a bunch of 30-plus-year-old professionals sitting here talking to you. Are we talking about a bunch of stuff you don't want to do, aren't interested in, and won't help you? It's okay to say I don't like your ideas. Tell me, I may not like all your ideas, that's all right. Tell me what you want. And so we just kind of make it a place where they feel like your voice is just as important, if not more important than what I have to say in terms of what you want as a family.
So are you moving towards then saying this child loves intramural activities in school, and we know this child needs some type of services, substance use services? You would link that into some services that would be provided through the school. How are you pulling these pieces together to meet the child's needs that have been identified, but also, if I'm hearing you right, give them the kind of pro-social, positive youth development opportunities that sometimes these kids lose?
I think that it's joy. I mean, there's some things that you can't necessarily replace. I can't say play soccer on your school team, but don't worry, then you don't have to do any drug treatment. But I think we also try to then link in things, where if you're missing school, or you're skipping class, or you have a criminal charge, or you come to school with marijuana, you can't play football. And so we kind of link back to, what does your coach say about that? Are they aware of what's happened? And so maybe we're linking the formal service to get them to see, like, that's something that maybe is a non-negotiable. You might need this professional kind of piece, but look at how just from a natural, I don't want to say consequence standpoint, but how are the things you just already want to do being impacted by the decisions that you're making? And so can we get your coach or your best friend's mother or whomever to be a part of your AA group, or whatever you're looking for? So just kind of trying to way to link those two together so that they really get a buy-in. It's not just something I have to show up and tick the boxes.
So when, I'm going to continue 1 second here. So when I hear you talk about those things, I could translate what you just described to any delinquency case being considered for diversion. I want to complicate it by putting in, now this child's actually living in a group home or living with a foster family. How does that complicate the diversion conversation? What you might want to organize in terms of the case plan, and the feasibility of the child being successful. So I complicated it here after you raised your hand. But go for it.
But I don't know that it changes things all that much. I was just going to agree with what Sarah was saying as far as we absolutely let the youth know that his or her input is as important as ours. That person is part of the team too. Our decision-making process. We have a lot of different options to kind of facilitate services. But if diversion is our option, if diversion is what the team chose, that means that we think this is a youth that needs more structure. We think this is someone that might be filed on court eventually, who have not been at that point, and we want to set that person up to succeed. So while we do look at things like the pro-social and the sports and that kind of stuff, we also are communicating with HHS and MFC to know that we're not duplicating services. Sometimes I will tell them, we're not going to put anything else in your program that you're really not required to do right now, but I'm going to get this eval done and follow the recommendations, attend school with no unexcused absences or tardies. And we actually write that down as part of the diversion plan, and then they understand that if those things don't go well or if they don't follow through with it, it's at that point that they might be filed on in court.
So distinguishing things that are conditions of diversion versus other things you're trying to provide them that wouldn't be a condition of diversion.
Right. And in the case of, I mean, we have a lot of families that come to us where the kid is already in foster care or is already, once in a while, who is in placement. And it's the same conversation. And I think things will change a little bit. It makes transportation maybe a little bit different. Or things that they may be required to do on the 3A docket or the other docket. But I don't know that it complicates things all that much as far as our discussion about diversion.
And you have your kind of HHS representation in your intake meetings, right? Karen,
No, you're fine, absolutely. I'm glad when you complicated it, you jumped to Karen.
All right. Thank you for that, Sarah. I want to go back to the panel. I'm looking for hands. Anybody else want to talk about this diversion piece and how you deal with the complications of it? Also, a child perhaps being under supervision. Yeah. Microphone coming your way. I know you got a big booming voice.
This is one of the challenges that we have in Sarpy County is diversion. We haven't had any cases that our plans that we staffed with our 1184 meetings. So this is definitely an area that we need to improve upon. So we include them in all of our meetings, the diversion staff, but we haven't had any real case planning with them.
As I'm talking with them, I really look at that level of risk and decide what services are appropriate and when do I get other agencies, other people involved based upon that level of risk.
Maggie?
I have a couple comments. Just as an example, I had a case, he started out on, got a truancy charge and came on with me to diversion, and then the 3A was filed. We had pro-social activity as a term of his contract, and then visits went to 7 days a week, so I told him, don't even worry about the pro-social. Your time is consumed fully of visits. He's traveling an hour and a half. So that was an example of how things would maybe be different, so I just wanted to point that out. And then, because I think diversion too, in my opinion, is very flexible. You decide what's in the best interest of the kid, and if you have to drop something off to benefit him in a different way, then you do that. And then my other thing I wanted to point out is we do what's called a youth statement, and when I first meet with the family, I give it to them, and then the child brings that to the meeting. And basically it's their reason why they should be accepted into diversion, so they have their voice being heard. So something kind of unique that Dodge County does.
Thank you. Molly, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just saying that I think that in Suffolk County we kind of struggle to identify all the youth that we could be staffing. I think that we're missing some because we just staff the ones that have already been filed on, so we're totally missing the whole diversion piece as well. I think there's some kids that get tickets and then we're not staffing them, and their tickets are just kind of put into a file. So I think really just working on the communication of identifying everyone that we could be, because then we can have more opportunity to get it up front versus now they've ramped up to where the charges and now we're staffing them. So I think that that's something that we really need to work on, as well as making a set plan during the meetings. Like Kara was saying and Sarah was saying, that the family walks out and okay, I have to do X, Y, and Z, and this is what's going on, otherwise this is where it's going. So I think that would be something so kind of just.
Thank you. So a couple challenges we see with diversion in jurisdictions around the country. One is that many diversion programs charge a fee, and it can complicate a child's participation if the county hasn't anticipated that situation and figured out how they're going to deal with it. If the child's in foster care, group home, impoverished circumstance, how are you dealing with diversion fees vis-a-vis your child welfare population?
I'll start because mine's easy. We have a community-based aid grant, and we do not charge a fee for Dodge County if you're a crossover on diversion.
So you've got a community fund that is specifically identified. We understand this is a barrier. We'll carry the fee. Okay. What is the fee, by the way?
In Dodge County, it's $75.
Okay, great. Christina?
We do have a fee, but we also have a community-based grant, and the fee can be waived or minimized or whatever needs to happen based upon that level of income for that family.
Yeah, we have a fee as well, and at times it can be waived, but I don't think the majority of the time it is waived. But yeah, we do have a fee as well.
So if it's not waived and the individual family or caseworker can't figure out a way to pay the fee, the child goes to the town. assistant?
No,
In-
that's
in
not true.
Sarpy County?
No, that's not true.
Okay,
That's-
Sandra,
no,
Sandra,
no,
jump in.
No child goes to court just because they can't.
So what happens with the diversion fee if you
They probably waive it. I don't know. Or NFC pays it. I don't know.
I may have misheard it then, I'm sorry.
Well, I think diversion has fees that they can utilize when it comes to that point, so
Okay,
whether it's how much it's done, I don't know that answer, so.
Yeah.
okay.
We need
Well,
her
we'll
here
get from
to tell
Sandra
us,
that
but-
no child in a crossover case is going to go not have diversion because they can't afford the fee.
I think that happens with any case
Okay.
in Sarpy, so.
Thank you.
Okay, well, just so you know, in relative terms to the rest of the country, it happens lots of times where kids don't go into diversion because they can't afford to pay the fee. Tim?
Well, for Douglas County, there's no fee, but we also have scholarship money or NFC. Sometimes the families are responsible to pay for something, and we work it out. They don't fail because they can't pay.
Monica? How's Lancaster doing here?
They waive the fee. I mean, if the family isn't able to pay, the fee's waived and they're still allowed in diversion.
Has that been a long-standing policy or fairly new policy?
That's fairly new.
Very new.
Yeah. When diver,
Monica just announced it right now.
yeah,
No,
it's
no,
all
I know you guys have been struggling with this and figuring out how to deal with
when
it.
diversion came back under Lancaster
Under
County
county.
management, that's when it changed. And so,
Okay, we're at the popcorn stage, which means we're going to go really, really fast, just like popcorn pops. Any other challenges, barriers in diversion that you just want to mention real quick without a full discussion, just so we have a placeholder on them? Other challenges around diversion you face on crossover youth? Any that you want to mention? Transportation?
we really haven't had an issue with diversion. We only have a couple of kids that are even on diversion that are crossover, so.
Okay, all right. So last question then. Tim, did you want to say something about the other?
No, I'm just going to agree on transportation.
Okay, all right. Someone walks into your county, sees the work that you're doing around intake, detention, diversion, initial charging. Are they thinking, wow, this stuff has been around forever because it just is going so smoothly? Do you think your staff, and I think some of you foreshadowed maybe it's a work in progress, feels like the change has already taken place? This is just the way we do our work now. As good as it was 2 years ago with our relationships, it kind of gets to the point that Judge O'Neill made. Now we formalized it, now we've routinized it, and now it's just kind of the way we do the work. Do you feel you're at that stage, Tim, in Douglas County, with the way the work in this stage of the process unfolds?
I think it's still work in progress. We're still learning from each other, and we're getting better. We're making a better product.
Okay, great.
But, we can stumble too. I mean, we can have smooth team meetings, and then sometimes we don't.
Others on that issue? Maggie?
I think it's better in Dodge County. It's not as much of a foreign subject to people, but still a work in progress, I think, but better.
I would agree, better. I don't feel as a diversion coordinator that I can't share, I don't have anyone to share the work with. I have a team that backs me and works with me, so better, but still working on it.
That's a huge shift for you, right?
Yeah.
We have some areas that we're doing very well, and some areas that we need to improve upon a lot. And I think our 1184 crossover team meetings is one of those areas that we need to improve upon, whether it's knowing what the roles of each entity is and coming up with a common theme. That's a big part of it, but other areas we are doing somewhat well. But it's always ongoing, we're always learning. I think another piece for us is the family piece. We've kind of struggled with that as well, with the distrust. So that's another area we need to improve upon as well.
Thanks. Monica, any place to add?
I think that we're better than we were when we started, and it is definitely a work in progress. But I also think that the workers and the officers all know that if they have a case where they're struggling, there's a guarantee that that case is going to be in our group staffing. So they know that at some point they do have that avenue to really have the team take a look at that case and give them some input, some advice, make some decisions that maybe need to be made so that they can move forward. So I think that's helped.
I think it's safe to say for all 5 of your counties that the work has trickled down to a line staff level, to a cross-systems manner, that people know what you're about, what you're trying to do. Whether the culture's changed completely, so everybody's on, kumbaya moment, that we're all in this together and exactly have the same approach on our cases, that's still the work in progress, I think, to some degree. Please join me in thanking the panel for this session.